Okay, we're live. Well, welcome everyone to this month's edition of the Our Ladies Dallas webinar series. My name is Sadiqa Watson. I am the organizer of the Dallas chapter of Our Ladies Dallas, the Dallas chapter of Our Ladies Global, sorry. And I am hosting tonight's session and welcoming our special guest, Chase Smith, who we will meet in just a minute. But before we meet our guest, I would like to meet you, because you're also our guest. So maybe where are you joining us from? We're based in Dallas, sunny Dallas, very hot here. But I'm just kind of curious to know where everybody is. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat, just kind of let us know where you're joining us from. Someone is from sunny Garland, just outside of Dallas. That's where I am too. Dallas, Seattle, New York. Our speaker's joining us from Los Angeles and McKinney, Texas. So a lot of locals here tonight. LA, okay, yep. Dallas, Joe Pool Lake, where's that? Never heard of that place. Is that somewhere I need to be? I don't know. Okay, yeah, we got a good group here. So we'll go ahead and get started. So so usually before we get started, I just kind of start with a few announcements just to make sure you guys are aware of how things are going. So as you know, we've been doing this in COVID time. So we've been virtual for over a year now, starting to think about next steps and us actually having in-person events, which I think is, relevant to our people living physically in Dallas. So I'm kind of curious to know, you can kind of, I'm probably going to actually send out, I think I said I was going to do it before and I just forgot, but I would like to send out a poll just to kind of find out how everybody's feeling about switching to the in-person format versus going virtual. So just kind of keep an eye out. I'll be probably sending it through the usual meetup channels. So I'll probably, you'll probably get an email that has that link to it if you're subscribed to the emails through Meetup. So so that's going to happen. Another thing in terms of announcements, I should have probably pinned myself. Okay, now you can see me. So I'll share my screen so you can there we go. So you should see that I'm on the Meetup page now that you likely visited in order to sign up for tonight's event. Usually here on the events page, you'd see a very long list of upcoming events. So far, we only have the one event that I'll introduce tonight. And then we have one other speaker. There was a conflict with the timing of this session, so we will have to push this out, I think probably one more week. So I will update that as soon as I get that updated information about the new date. But otherwise, those are the only two talks I have on the agenda. So that means I'm waiting for you to contact me and let me know if you're interested in giving a talk. For now, just kind of assuming that it's virtual, but open to in person if you are local or if you just happen to be traveling to Dallas and you think you might want to set up a talk. I'm definitely open to hearing, from different people, different levels. So if you're an experienced user, if you're a new user of R, we want to hear from everyone. If you have a polished talk with slides and a fancy demo, or you've got just an R Markdown document where you're just kind of going through a few code chunks. Either of those is fine. We're welcoming all levels. So please reach out to me so that we can have other people talking and sharing all the great information. It could be just something that you learned that you thought was pretty cool, or it could be a package that you're developing or some work that you're doing, like some kind of interesting use case. Just kind of let us know if you're interested in sharing. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then I'm going to transition to this other thing. Just one second. Okay, so I will be, maybe before we move on to the next thing, before we introduce our speaker, any questions or comments or anything? Everybody good? Any issues getting in here or anything? Okay. Silence means yes, I guess. So, okay, I think we're good to get started. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker, Chase Smith. So before I read off all her credentials and everything, I will say that I've personally met Chase Smith a number of times as both of us were coming up through through graduate school and just trying to understand, statistics and, trying to become professionals and maybe just different organizations, mentoring organizations that we both joined, but we just kind of happened to meet up together in these spaces. So I'm really happy to see that she's thriving, teaching data science, and also working currently as a senior analytics engineer at Netflix. So, very, very rich mix of experiences that she will talk a little bit about. And of course, she's going to talk about the tidyverse, which is something that I think if you're interested in using R, working with R, doing development in R, you kind of have to, this is sort of 101. You kind of need to know the tidyverse very well, just because there's so many cool, useful packages that will help you in your work. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and toss this over to Dr. Chase Smith, who will, share an exciting presentation with us. So welcome, Chase.
Thank you so much for having me. I was telling Sadiqa, it's been a long time since I've used Zoom regularly. So let's hope that this works. And you can just let me know if you can't see the full slide.
Looks good.
All right, and please, because there aren't many people here, feel free to interrupt. If you have a question in the chat, just post it there and then we can pause. I can answer along the way. I know how it is to save your question to the end. Sometimes you forget, so we'll keep this very informal. The title of this talk is Journey Through the Tidyverse. And as Sadiqa said, I'm currently a senior analytics engineer at Netflix, but I'm going to tell you about other jobs I've had in my career and kind of how I got to this point. So I like to do these types of talks in acts. So the first act will just be a quick intro of me. So who am I? I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to college there at Spelman College. It's a historically Black college, mostly women. Loved it. I was a math major there. And from Spelman, I went to grad school in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I was in a PhD program for biostatistics, and that's kind of when I met Sadiqa as we were trying to figure out our careers in statistics and network with people. From Chapel Hill, I moved to DC, and I'll tell you more about what I did there in a second. I lived in DC for about 5 years. From there, I moved to Taipei, Taiwan for 2 years. Kind of life circumstances took me there. I got married and we had the opportunity to travel and live abroad for those 2 years. So we took full advantage and I learned a lot, loved living in Taiwan. We moved back to the States, to Charlotte, North Carolina, back in summer of 2019. And I started teaching at Davidson College, which is a college just 20 miles north of Charlotte. I call it Steph Curry School because he's the most notable alumnus that people tend to remember. And then most recently, I moved out to LA back in December. I started working at Netflix last year. I started working remotely from Charlotte, and then a few months in, we moved out to LA. So that's where I am now. In terms of my career and how I practiced, I started off in statistics. So when I was in college, the first, you see at the bottom, the first programming language I learned was SAS. I was doing lots of programming in SAS. When I got to grad school, I kind of moved into R. Then RStudio became a thing. I started picking up other tools. By the time I moved to DC, this field of data science was kind of coming about. And I was meeting people in the health and IT space who were, calling themselves data scientists and working with really large data sets. And they were kind of cool nerds and I wanted to be like them. So I, tried to make my way in this field of data science. And my current role places me, data science is super broad. So I feel like I'm more in the analytics tier. There's analytics people, there's true modeling data scientists, people who do AI, machine learning, and then there's data engineering. There's so many facets of data science, but I feel like I sit comfortably in analytics, where I'm mostly wrangling data and making it look pretty and making it, boiling it down to informative bites for people who need it the most. In terms of the areas of application, so I started off in public health. My mantra was I want to use my math skills to help people. And so public health seemed to be like the right fit for that. And then I told you I was teaching at Davidson College. Even when I was in grad school, I did a little bit of teaching. I helped develop a course for lab scientists who needed to learn biostatistics. So I've always been like a teacher at heart. And now I'm in the tech / entertainment space. Netflix does consider itself both a tech and entertainment company. We do both really well. And then in terms of tools, today's talk is going to focus on R and RStudio, but I will tell you that in my current role, I use a little less R, more SQL, Python, Tableau, but definitely my training and all the practice I got in R and RStudio have positioned me well to use those other tools. So we'll talk more about that. All right, on to Act 2, teaching with R and RStudio. So when I taught at Davidson College, I was only there for one academic year. I got to teach 2 courses. One was called Data Science and Society. This is a screenshot of the course page, and you can actually still access a lot of my course materials because I wanted to make the course as open source as possible. I'm all about accessibility. This is how I taught myself a lot of data science skills and R, Python, SQL skills. So I'm all about kind of keeping things open for other people. So feel free to poke around on that site. You can basically act like you're taking the course if you want. You just won't have an instructor to guide you along. Another course that I helped to develop and I taught was an intro to statistics course. So at Davidson, before my course, there were only courses in stats that were based in the psych department, the econ department, but not one based in math and computer science. So I helped to develop that one. And both of my courses had this social justice focus because there's a curricular requirement at Davidson that students have to take at least one course that addresses justice, equality, and community, or JEC. So I was happy that both of my courses were JEC courses because I'm passionate about those topics and wanted to make sure that there was a data focus related to those topics. And then I also taught a course online on edX.org. We can talk more about that if you have questions about it, but this course was on data literacy, but I was basically teaching beginners how to use R and RStudio. So I supported the course live last summer, and now it runs on a self-paced, as a self-paced course on edX.org. So back to this course, Data Science and Society. I told you about the curricular requirement. Just to remind you, Davidson is a small liberal arts college, most like Spelman, the one I went to. And we had a math and computer science department. So I think that gives a different flavor to working with data when you're based at a liberal arts college or university, because you have a more well-rounded education and you think about other topics like art, history, and how those things relate to these more technical topics in math and computer science. My course, you saw the code was 110, so that's a lower level course. So for many of the students, it's their very first foray into anything statistics, data science, programming. So I wanted it to be a good entry point because I know how important that is for students when that beginner course is the one that like weeds you out. I didn't want my course to be a weed out course. I wanted it to be inclusive and for people to see how data applies to any and everything that they're interested in. At Davidson, there was just a lot of general interest in data science and also the intersection of data and issues in society. A lot of our students are very passionate about different topics in society. So yeah, it's just a good confluence of like all these things that I think made the course really great. I didn't create the course, but I did have the opportunity to kind of massage it and make it into what I wanted it to be, which I appreciated. But I had a great foundation from my Davidson colleagues. So my 3 main areas of focus for this course were accessibility, relevance, and transferable skills. So first, like I said, I wanted the course to be open source. A lot of colleges use these like learning management systems like Banner, Moodle, Blackboard. I wasn't really into those. So I wanted my course to have like its own website and to just be easily accessible, like the first point that students went to for any information. I wanted to teach using R, which my colleagues had also done with the course. But because R is a free, open source, accessible software, it's great to teach with, it's great to learn as your first programming language. And then also we used a free text. So this book, R for Data Science, is easily Googleable, by Hadley Wickham, who I call like the R wizard, or at least a tidyverse wizard, and Garrett Grohlman. This book was really good for teaching. I like how it was set up. And in terms of accessibility, also just giving students like foundational skills, like how do you download and install R and RStudio appropriately? How do you open it up? How do you organize your files? Just really basic steps that set you up for a great foundation as a programmer or data scientist, whatever your goal is. I wanted my course to be relevant. So this was the 2019-2020 school year. Coming up in my day, my school didn't have like a stats major or data science major. A lot of what I learned in my journey, I taught myself. I had to be very resourceful using like free resources online. So I was determined to not use like toy data sets. You may have heard about like the Titanic data set that a lot of people use to learn machine learning. I wasn't into those. I wanted relevant data, messy data that had to be cleaned up. So that was my focus. Like I told you, I didn't like the learning management software that we used at Davidson. No offense to whoever chose that and managed that system, but I just wanted to just make things as relevant as possible based on my own work experience for my students. I focus a lot on data visualization and storytelling because I feel like that's the bread and butter of what I do now and what a lot of data scientists do. If you can tell the story using a picture or give someone something interactive, if you can tell the story in a way that's compelling and drives people to like a sense of urgency to do something or act in a specific way, to me, that's an impactful data analysis. So lots of data viz and use of colors and having to present and talk and write about what you did. And then I also tried to incorporate a lot of current events using relevant data sets. So there was one case where like my husband was listening to a podcast episode that was talking about people who were sentenced to death row, wrongly or rightfully, and how many were executed and by state. So I went and found the data and like incorporated that into my class. So any interesting topic related to an injustice and inequality or some marginalized community, I would try to find a way to incorporate it. And then finally, for transferable skills, we use Slack to communicate on my course. So I had all the students download it because it's free. And that's how I send announcements out. That's how I group students together for homeworks and projects. And it just taught them a skill that I use every day now in my own work. A lot of companies use Slack for communication. Teamwork and collaboration, creating end-to-end projects. So coming up with an idea, seeing if you can find some data, getting the data, doing something with the data, crafting a story, and then telling the story. That's what I had my students do rather than like write papers about somebody else's project or just mimic something that someone else had done. So I feel like those are really transferable skills. So at this point, you're probably like, okay, where's the R? Where's the tidyverse? We did all this using the tidyverse. And for those of you who are not familiar, this is a suite of packages that's available in R and RStudio. I believe they were developed by Hadley Wickham, and they may have even expanded beyond what I have listed here. But in my course, we use pretty much all of these, mainly dplyr for like wrangling data. We'll talk more about like specific functions and things within those packages. Lots of ggplot2 for making interactive visualizations, really nice, colorful static visualizations. We use stringr a lot to manipulate text data. We use lubridate quite a bit to manipulate date time variables, and tidyr as well to transpose data sets or just manipulate them in different ways. So I incorporated a lot of these packages into my course. So specifically going into dplyr, I kind of like drilled into my students' minds to remember these 6 functions because I use them, even though I'm not using the R language as much in my work and I use SQL, it's the same principles. You're choosing columns that you want to keep from a data set. So you're selecting. You're filtering out rows of data based on certain conditions. So maybe beyond a certain date, you only want to keep that data, or you only want to keep individuals' data if they were from a specific state or if they were a specific gender. We mutated variables, so either transforming an existing variable, converting from thousands of dollars to hundreds of dollars, or creating an all new variable. We use group by a lot to perform operations by groups and summarize data using min, max, median, average, and finally sorting data by the order of specified columns. So if you truly want to dig through my course website, you'll find lots of exercises that stretch your muscles in working with all these different functions on different data sets. Again, I told you that data viz was super important for me. So we did lots of work. Like I think in week 3, I started to introduce data visualization. And then pretty much every exercise from that point on involves some kind of data visualization. So one of my R role models that I should have put at the end of my slides, her name is, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. If I'm not, I apologize to her, but Mina Chetinkaya-Rendell. She's also a data science instructor and works for RStudio. I just, like, every resource I would go to kept pointing me to something that she created or that she helped to develop or improve. And so she had this phrase called give the cake, which she used in her teaching, which is show your students or show your stakeholder, whoever, what you're trying to create, even if you draw it out. So on this, in the upper right, you see a plot, a finished plot. This is what I'm trying to get to. So I show my students, like, this is the endpoint that we'll get to. And then along the bottom, you just start with very foundational steps. Like, first, let's set up our X and Y axis. Let's just get some dots on there. And then let's group things in a better way. Let's maybe rearrange our axes. And then instead of having just groups of dots, let's turn it into a box plot. And then finally, let's polish it off and make it, like a cake. So this is like, you have a recipe, you have your ingredients are just kind of sitting there. You start cracking your eggs, and you start mixing things together. It starts to smell like cake batter. And then you get it in the oven, it bakes. It looks like a cake, but there's no frosting. And then finally you put the frosting and the finishing touches on it. So I like this analogy of give the cake. And then I feel like this last step is so important because, it's easy to create a very simple plot using like whatever the defaults are for ggplot. But what makes a difference is when you use the other aesthetics, color, size, different shapes, the font size, whatever it is, to really direct your viewers' attention where you want it. So we talked a lot about like not just making a basic plot, but making something that looks like cake that people want to consume, and we'll talk about. So lots of lessons learned from teaching with R and RStudio, and I feel bad. I should have done a demo, but I'd be more than happy to come back and like do a demo of like how I created some of these tools and just kind of work through some examples with you all. But I'll just kind of talk to you about them today. So what I learned in teaching is that R Markdown is just super duper flexible. For my course, I built everything using R and RStudio. So the course website, if we just quickly go back to the screenshot of my course website, this was built using R Markdown. And I was able to publish it to a domain owned by the college by just knitting it into HTML. It was as simple as that. It was very easy to update with each week's like lessons and homework and all that. So I really like picking up that skill of like basically creating a website. I created the syllabus as a PDF that was knitted from R Markdown. And that allowed me to like use the same theme and font everywhere. I'm really big on that kind of thing. I made the slides using R Markdown and IO slides. All the tutorials, again, Dr. Chetinkaya-Rendell started this group where they like created their own textbook and they had a template for tutorials. And so I kind of picked up their template because it's open source and made it my own. And then finally, all the homework assignments were just R Markdown HTML docs that just say, here's where the data is, or here's where you can look for data. Question 1, question 2, and the students could take it and create their own R Markdown and submit their homework in that way. So in doing all this, R Markdown is so dependent on like HTML if you're knitting for something for the web. So I picked up a lot of useful HTML and CSS skills too. The CSS helps you with like the style of things, like changing colors of boxes or the placement of your headers and all that kind of stuff. So very, very useful skills that I'm not using like today, but they were very useful to pick up, and I know I'll use them in the future. Other things I learned, if I could do it again, I would definitely build on my tools more efficiently. So a lot of stuff I just did kind of one off, but I would have wanted to create my own templates and packages for things that were repetitive tasks. So like my homework assignments. I also wanted to teach my students how to do like version control and how to iterate documents and data products using GitHub. And RStudio does allow you to connect to Git and GitHub for that purpose. But I felt like that was just too much for that level of a course. And now I'm actually in a position of a student again, because I used to tell my students, like, don't spin your wheels when it comes to our stuff. If you're sitting on it for like 15, 20 minutes, you need to ask for some help. And there have been some times in my current position where I'm just spinning my wheels and I'm like, wait a minute, I have to go back to my teacher shoes and tell myself, like, you need to either ask for help or find a different way to do this. Again, relying on community. So this is what I love about Our Ladies. You have a community of people. It's a safe community. There's something about it being called Our Ladies that to me makes it even safer. But yeah, just a willingness to like rely on your community, help others, and ask for help when needed. And then just like I always have to tell myself to try to program as efficiently as possible. Don't do the most complicated thing. Do it like the cake. Start with something basic and then just build off of that until you get to that frosting step. But all in all, using the tidyverse has improved my SQL skills, because I learned R before I learned SQL. And so learning that dplyr language, those terms of select, filter, mutate, arrange, all of that relates directly to SQL keywords like select from, where, group by, things that I use on a daily basis, truly like spend hours of my day doing. And then finally, I just learned to like continue to think visually. So at Netflix, I'm often working with stakeholders. Like their job is not to manipulate the data. They need the results. They need to make a decision. And so my job is to give them things in a way that will help enable their decision making, not influence necessarily, but just enable them to make the best decision. So I have to think about, what does my audience want to see? Like what would be most helpful, as opposed to like, what's the coolest or fanciest thing I can do? An example of this is like, sometimes you'll see people created something really complicated, an interactive Tableau dashboard or Plotly plot that does something. And it's like, really, what would be more useful is just a simple table that lays this information out. So I'm always having to strike that balance of like, what does my audience really need versus what would be cool to do? So I love using GIFs. This is my favorite GIF from The Wire. But I'm like, I went from student to teacher, and now I'm a student all over again. So the learning never stops. All right, so Act 4, moving from R to SQL. So I guess as a segue, last year the pandemic started. I was teaching online. I didn't enjoy teaching online as much because, I wasn't with my students in person, but we had to do what we had to do. We were very flexible in the beginning of the pandemic. But the pandemic kind of caused me to think more about like, what is it that I really want to be doing? Are there other opportunities out there? And I got a message from a recruiter from Netflix on LinkedIn. And I said, maybe this time I'll entertain it and just see how far it goes. And how far it went was that I'm now working at Netflix as of August of last year. It was a hard switch to make because I really enjoyed working at Davidson. But it was the right switch because, yeah, now I'm like really using all those skills that I was teaching to others, and I had been wanting to get back into doing things more for myself. So yeah, now I'm doing that. I'm like the student all over again, like I said. So in my current role, I do a lot of transforming data into insights for creative teams. So at Netflix, we make a lot of stuff on our own. There's things that we acquire or license from other studios. But either way, we have to make decisions about like how much to pay for those things, when to launch them, all that kind of stuff. So we have various teams that work on different aspects of that. And I've mostly worked in content performance. So once something's already launched on the service, how is it doing? Where are people watching it from? What language are they watching it in? How often have they been watching? all these different elements that kind of relate to our metrics and help determine like the value of a piece of content. And every day it's just using advanced SQL queries in a truly big data environment. In my course, we never used huge data sets. It was mainly just, you know, a manageable size, but I'm finding myself having to use things like Spark and Python because our data sets are just so large, but it's lots of fun. I get to work on really interesting problems, and I expect for you to ask me questions about my job at Netflix, but yeah, I'll wait for you to ask me. I'm not just gonna tell you things, so, but I do enjoy it. So making the leap from R to SQL and Tableau, yeah, I already said the deep plural language relates directly to SQL, so it was very easy to make that jump. And then like, because R is so powerful for data manipulation and wrangling, I always think in that way. So it's very easy to make this jump into larger data sets and having to think through what I need to do before I actually do it. Because you can't just test things out on a really huge data set. You have to really know what your approach is and know what you're doing. And then also I did experiment a little with the SQL DF package in R just to like really help with my transition. This package enables you to do actual SQL queries within your RStudio or R environment. So you can use those SQL terms of select, from, where, group by, having. So I did experiment with that a bit. And then also I used a lot of the package Plotly with ggplot, and also the leaflet package for maps. I should have put that in here. That helps with preparing to use Tableau, which is good for like really interactive data visualizations where you hover over something and you get more information, or you can zoom into a map or zoom out. So very good foundation for using these other tools by starting in R and RStudio. So finally, just some random musings I wanted to share with you all, and we can spend the rest of the time just answering questions or talking about whatever, my career trajectory, whatever interests you. But one thing I wanted to talk about was, had I stayed at Davidson? This is kind of like my apology letter to my colleagues at Davidson, but I had really grand goals of things that I wanted to do had I stayed there. So I'll just kind of run through a few of these, but I definitely wanted to teach higher level courses using R, where we got into like using Git and GitHub, where we really got into machine learning, text analytics, that kind of thing. I wanted to start a Charlotte Our Ladies chapter. I think there's still not one in that area, but I think just with like the Davidson students, some of the other colleges that are in the area, the number of banking professionals that are there, I think there's a critical mass of Our Ladies and people who identify as women to start a chapter there. So yeah, Sadika, you can let your, your colleagues know in the organization, we need a chapter in Charlotte. Of course, a pandemic happened. When it happened, I asked my students in both my classes, do you want to talk about the pandemic? Like, do you want to talk about the data that's coming out? Do you want to address it in the course, or do you just not want to? My data science course, interestingly, said, wait, which one said which? One course said they didn't want to, the other said they did. I think my data science course said, no, we don't even want to talk about it. My stats course, they did want to like learn more about the data and talk about it and use things that were coming out to help learn statistics. But I was thankful that I had the empathy to ask whether they wanted to address it instead of forcing them to either address it or ignore it. But I think that definitely like this past school year, I would have wanted to address like what happened and really use my public health background and my data background to make sense of like, this is what happens. Was it a messaging problem? Like, why are we still in this pandemic a year and a half later? I don't know. One other thing I wanted to do was help curate public data sets for teaching. It's really, really hard to find public data sets that are suitable enough for like using R to manipulate them. I had to work really hard to find the data sets that we did use. And honestly, there was some, we'll talk about this in a second. I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, it's hard to find data for teaching. I talked about developing more packages and templates, definitely more GitHub. Yeah, there's so many things I wanted to do, but going back to this public data sets, one of the things I realized, or missteps that I think I made, there were two. So there were two. The first was I was using DataCamp a lot because I found DataCamp to be really useful in my learning journey. But something happened, and it's something you can look up on the Our Lady's website actually. But basically, there was an allegation against the CEO at the time, and it wasn't handled well. It wasn't addressed well. It became this huge thing in the data community, and basically, a lot of people like divested their resources, subscription, completely from DataCamp, and I was one of those people. So it forced me to be a little more resourceful in like how I was learning things and yeah, so that was a learning lesson. And then also the website 538.com was started by Nate Silver. I recently learned that there were some allegations about the culture at that organization, not friendly to women, not friendly to minorities. Um, and so, yeah, I kind of decided like, well, I'm not gonna rock with 538 anymore either, where I was using a lot of their data sets in my courses. So I feel like those two things would have been challenges, but I would have welcomed them because that's the right thing to do. And that's in the spirit of my courses, where it's a mix of the data science, but also that this like social responsibility, and very relevant, you know, like a good thing to talk to my students about. So yeah, those are interesting things that happen. But I'm glad they were brought to light, and I'm glad that like Our Ladies has stood firm in their stance with Data Camp. And yeah, always good to bring these things up and just make a choice of what you want to do and be okay with the choice that you make. So with that in mind, I do want to present 4 examples of people, things that really have inspired me in the past few years in my journey
Before
in
we
data
go on,
science
Dr.
and
Smith,
analytics. Yes,
we have a few questions in the chat.
yeah, let's have them.
So the first one is, can you talk more about your workflow incorporating R, Python, and SQL?
Yes, that's a good question. So in my current workflow, there are cases where I just use a Jupyter notebook. If I'm doing kind of like an exploratory analysis and I need to have all the steps there, I might be running multiple SQL queries. So I'll just do it all in the Jupyter notebook. And we have tools where you can do the query within the notebook using Spark SQL. So sometimes I'll do that. A lot of times I'm running a SQL query to just pull some set of data that I then throw into Tableau to visualize and be able to explore. So I do that probably like 60% of the time. I will say like 20% of the time for the notebooks. And then it's growing now, but the other percent of the time I have gotten back into using R and RStudio just because I miss like the plotting capabilities, and I was just more comfortable using ggplot than the Python plotting. So yeah, and text analytics as well. I've started to do a little bit of that in some of my work. So now I've gotten back into using R Markdown kind of as my Jupyter notebook. But we have both. You can use the RStudio IDE, or you can just open a Jupyter notebook in an R environment. But I think I prefer to just use R Markdown because I was so used to doing that before. So that's kind of the breakdown of like when I use those specific tools. Does that answer a question?
While we're waiting for
Yes.
that. Oh, yep, there we go. And I was just going to chime in with just another comment because I also have to do the same. I have to use sometimes R and Python in the same script, or within my
Yes.
R session, I'm having to pull SQL data in. So there's tons of packages. I actually just gave a talk internally at my company about how to incorporate R and SQL and just kind of bring that data in, and the pros and cons of pulling the data fully, like the full data set, into your workspace versus leaving it where it is and just kind of using some of these different types of dbplyr operations or so on. So there's lots of resources there. So if there's any interest, myself or Dr. Smith or someone else could definitely talk more about how we handle that in a future session. So great question.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I call myself old because I feel old. I have been analyzing data for like 20 years now. So I've seen the progression of like when these tools didn't necessarily play together very well. So it's really nice to know that, yeah, you can use Jupyter Notebook to do all kinds of things and use multiple software together at the same time.
Great. We have another question. Do you have resources for data visualization and storytelling?
Ooh, yes, and I was thinking about that because yeah, I left some inspiration people off my slides, and I'm really sorry that I did that. But definitely Mina Chetinkaya Rendell, and I put her name in the chat after I finish, just to remind me. Um, she's a good inspiration as like a data science teacher and RStudio enthusiast. Um, Learned a lot from her. And then Data Viz, yes, Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer Knaflick. Again, I'll put their names in the chat, just remind me. And then a couple of these people that we'll go through here. But those are my two main like inspirations for Data Viz stuff. And also, do I have the book here? Yes. Give me one second. So this one wasn't included in my slide. So sorry to Randy because I got to meet him. He signed my book like in 2013. But cool infographics, like this was a huge thing back in 2013 when I was just getting into data science. I was all about infographics, and I used infographics in my job at the DC Health Department to like help them become more innovative in how they were talking about people who were living with HIV/AIDS and STDs. um, yeah, so huge inspiration from Randy Crone and cool infographics. Any other questions?
Yes. Okay. How did you deal with problems when students couldn't install something or their operating system was too old or not compatible with something? And have you ever tried R Cloud for teaching?
Ooh, yes, great question. I mean, both parts of that question are great. The first part, I really put a lot of thought into the installation part for the first week of the course. So I would spend a lot of times with students personally. It was often the students with Macs who just, it wasn't clear, like certain steps of the process. So I would just sit with them and help them through it. Davidson was great because they had loaner laptops for students and like lots of places around campus that had computers for students to use. So we talked about like other ways to access R. And yes, I did suggest the R Cloud for some of my students who just had really old computers, but were able to like access the internet at least. They still had some challenges, but they were very resilient and perseverant and worked through those challenges. So thanks for that question. That was a really good one. I found Art Cloud to be kind of clunky sometimes, but I'm sure it's gotten better because that's the art spirit. Like things just keep improving over time. So I did teach one workshop using Art Cloud, and there were some challenges because it was just a 2-hour workshop, and for some people it was like 30 to 45 minutes just getting set up, which I felt bad about. Um, but yeah, I think it's become a better tool since then.
I can also give a +1 vote for RStudio Cloud. I've used it personally when teaching different types of workshops and also for workshops that I've attended. It's just so helpful to have the instructor set up an environment that I can just go into. I don't have to worry about, installing all the packages necessarily. They might have already set that up ahead of time, so I can just jump right in and start working on the examples. So and pretty much everybody can use it, I guess, on their own system. And I think there was even one session where I kind of joined at the last minute and all I had was my tablet with me and I was able to still get on and still go in and type things and build up some of the code in my tablet. So yeah, I definitely would give a +1 vote for RStudio Cloud. Another one, kind of a related resource, is Google Colab, which
Oh yes,
natively
yeah.
natively works in Python, but there is an option for you to create a notebook in R with an R environment. And I've definitely used that as well, especially for some of my talks where I have to use a GPU, for example. They give you free access to GPU. So if you want to, run some computer vision models or, which is what I was doing, I could definitely use their resources for free. So I can put that in the chat as well. But yeah, these are really good questions. Sounds like we have some people
Yeah,
who.
that's awesome. Yeah, I've used Colab only for Python for a workshop, and it was super useful, a nice alternative to Jupyter Notebook and Markdown.
Great. And we have another question. Sounds like you've had a lot of flexibility when teaching. Do you attribute that to the fact that your school was a small liberal arts school?
Yes. And I kind of hesitated because it's like, are they all like that? No. But Davidson is just a special place. Like it's small, but there's lots of resources. They know there's a demand for data science, and they know that like data science careers are lucrative and good for their students. So they made ways for that enable us to be flexible and do what we needed to do to offer the best course.
Okay, those are all the questions in the chat. Well, I think I have one question since you said you wouldn't say anything about it unless somebody asked you. So you said you wanted somebody to ask you about your career in Netflix, so you can talk about so what is it like to work there, or what are some of the things that you're working on? Just whatever you like to
Yeah.
share. I think it would be really interesting to hear about that.
I'll share a little bit now, and then I just have a few more slides, so I'll go through those, and then I'll share more. So I can say this: we are going through this shift right now, like a shift in focus, and so I get to be a part of that shift. Like I'm working on a team that is directly related to that, and it's like all everyone talks about these days. So that's been really fun to be like truly on the cutting edge, because when you think about like Netflix is kind of the OG of streamers, and all these other entrants to the space like Disney Plus, Hulu, HBO. Everybody's trying to catch up with Netflix, like in whatever way that they can. So you would come in thinking like, oh, Netflix has everything covered, but there's still ways that we're innovating. There's still things we're learning. And so it's fun to be a part of like this huge shift in focus. Um, I also enjoy that like every job I've had has been like teaching, where you have a stakeholder, student, whatever words you want to use. And we use the word student, teacher, or whatever, but I learned a lot from my students at Davidson, students I had at UNC and other places. So it's the same in Netflix. Like my expertise is the data and the analytics, but their expertise is like asking the right question, or like asking good follow-up questions, or like watching them take those analytics and insights and turn it into a good decision and see the impact of that decision. So it's really nice to learn from like the expertise of other people. We also have just like fantastic data engineers. Like everybody's great, but our data engineers, like I don't have to clean data. We have very clean data, and I don't know how they do it. Just very well structured. It was easy for me to just kind of jump right in and start using the data tables for whatever I needed. So just really great people to work with who are truly like experts at what they do. Yeah, so again, I'll say more, but first, let me just like this part's important to me because I feel like in this community, you all could benefit from, if you haven't heard of these people, knowing about these people. So I'll go through these quickly. This person, Joy Walamini, really inspires me. She's an expert in fairness in AI, artificial intelligence, and a big proponent of inclusion in tech. This is kind of a Netflix plug, I guess, but we have a documentary that was made starring her called Coded. We didn't make it, but it's on our platform, called Coded Bias. And it just kind of follows her journey and like how she got into AI, and how she studies systems that basically use facial recognition. And we've learned that a lot of facial recognition software has not been trained on darker skinned people, and people of other marginalized groups. And thus, they don't work well in those groups. And so, what is the social impact of that if you have something that's being used by, say, a police department, or by a bank to decide who gets loans and credit cards? So yeah, really great person to learn from in terms of like algorithmic justice and bias in machine learning and AI. We tend to think that STEM is like exempt from discrimination against people, but in this day and age with all these tech resources and data and it pervading every aspect of our lives, we have to think about fairness at every step. And it's something that we talk about at Netflix too, like fairness in our algorithms. So really good topic in person to learn from. I have this book here. So I'm ashamed to say that I learned only in like 2020 that W.E.B. Du Bois was basically a database pioneer. So at the World Fair in Paris, like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, he had a group of students from Clark Atlanta University, right down the street from where I went to college, who created all these like hand-drawn, very meticulously drawn though, data visualizations that help to kind of expose the economics, social factors, lots of things about like Black America, the slavery era of our history, Reconstruction. Really good book. And there's also a lot of good YouTube videos if you just kind of search his name and database. There's a guy from, I think, McKinsey and Company who has become like a huge fan of these databases, and some other groups too, but some really good YouTube videos that kind of dig deep into this book and like his work and how this work was received at the fair. So this picture on the right-hand side is the actual exhibit from the exposition. So these were really huge posters of the databases that were all like hand-drawn by him and his students. So really compelling to know that like someone that I saw as a Black history pioneer and thought leader also be a database person was very inspirational to me. All right, so love me some Mona Chalabi, another Netflix plug. There's a show that apparently not that many people have seen, but it's called The Fix. There's only one season of it, but the premise of the show was there's a panel of comedians, and this third panel person, Jimmy Carr, he's a comedian, he hosts it. And each episode they attack a different like issue in society, like the wealth gap, or like housing discrimination. And so they address it with like a little bit of humor, but a little bit of seriousness too. But each of the comedians has like their own pair, and they have to come up with a fix for that solution. And so before they come up with their solution, Mona comes out with some data to just give them more context on, you know, what the problem is. And she does a lot of hand-drawn visualizations. So I like the fact that hers are not done in R or Python, but they're still compelling. So you should follow her on Instagram. She also used to work for 538 and can speak to some of the discrimination that I talked about earlier. She currently works for The Guardian, which is a UK publication, and does these databases to go along with stories that they publish. So just very inspirational. I like her sense of style. I like that she's like a trendy, chic data biz person. So she's inspired me a lot. And then finally, I discovered this book in 2019. It's called Invisible Women. And this woman, she exposes gender bias in everything. I would say one of the only flaws in her book is that she approaches gender just from that binary, like male, female. And she also doesn't address the intersectionality of race and other aspects of your identity. But just that binary gender bias exposes a lot. And she's a good person to also follow on Twitter, and maybe even I should tell her, you know, to start digging into those other topics too. But really good book, not like a data science person necessarily, but nice storytelling to go along with true like data facts that she presents in her book. So these are kind of like my top 4 inspirations. I told you I'll put in the chat some of the other ones too. But would be interested to learn about yours as well. If there's like people you follow on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever, Instagram, who like kind of help keep you going as a data person or R user, would love to hear about that. But with that, I know my Twitter handle's on the meetup, but I don't really tweet. I haven't tweeted in years. You can connect with me on LinkedIn though. You can email me anytime. I'd be happy to like come back and participate in sessions with you all. I need a community, so I'm hoping to join one of the Our Ladies communities out here. But yeah, like don't hesitate to reach out to me. I love talking about anything data and R. I think as I get back to using more R and RStudio, it would be great to have more people to kind of hold me accountable or to like demo things with. So yeah, would love to connect with you. But thanks for listening, and yeah, let's get back into more questions and things.
Fantastic presentation. Thank you. Yeah, that was super, super interesting. No more questions yet in the chat, but feel free to pop in if you have some other questions, or if you'd like to unmute, we could definitely you know, take your verbal question if you don't want to type it. But I have one while we're waiting for a question. So I was wondering, I guess because we were both trained as statisticians and now we're both working as data scientists or in the data science space. So I was just kind of curious to know about that transition for you. I know how it was for me, but I would definitely would like to hear, from you. So, what are some of the additional skills that you felt like you needed to learn in order to make that transition, and how did you go about, actually studying those topics?
I actually would love to hear your answer about this too, but for me, I kind of pinpointed it very early on in my PhD program. I was still using SAS, but I noticed that we had like a component of professors and students who were getting into statistical genetics, and they were all using R. And I was like, well, why are they all using R and we're all still using SAS? Then I started working at a pharmaceutical company. I did 2 summer internships where, because the FDA was mostly using SAS, that's what all the companies used. But for some use cases, they were using R, like for database. So I was like, okay, here's this R thing again. So I saw the R thing coming. So I just started to teach myself or like align myself with some of those students who were using it. And then truly, like when I moved to DC and I was just in a different environment where everything was around like government, policy, health, IT, like all the conferences were there. That's when I started to see data science is becoming like a true field that one could get into, and the intersection of stats, computer science, and math. And I felt I had a great foundation in math and stats, but not so much the computer science, which helped with like programming efficiency, knowing how to do loops and functions and that kind of thing. So though that was the gap in my skills that I kind of sought to fill in that computer science part.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. So I actually went all the way through my PhD program. And so I actually worked as a biostatistician for 5 years. And somewhere along that journey, that's when I started hearing about data science and how it's just, this is they're working on these cool projects and they just can't find enough data scientists. They're just scrambling to put, fill these roles, and they're paying people so much money. So get in, So that's what I tell people. I drank that Kool-Aid and say, okay, let me figure out if this is something I want to
The
get.
Kool-Aid was good.
Yeah, it was good. I'm still drinking it. It's good. It's good. Yeah, the hype is real. But yeah, so at the time I was very much intimidated because I was looking at some of the advertised or the like the job descriptions, and the list of requirements was so long. It was just like, how can I possibly get enough expertise in order to actually get into this field, like before, I'm ready to retire. So I've kind of boiled it down into like 3 major areas that I think data science includes. And if you've attended some of these talks before, you've probably heard me say this already, but the 3 areas are some proficiency in data analytics. So that would be just kind of in general, how to handle data, but also including like, the specific kinds of modeling strategies, so statistics and machine learning, that kind of thing. So, data modeling, data analysis, that's one. As Dr. Smith mentioned, computer science is a huge component. So just learning how to program, how to code, just in general, just thinking about how do you do for loops, and when should I use a while loop versus a for loop, and how do I, just kind of handle different kinds of things. How do I use Linux? Because pretty much every company that you go to, they're going to expect you to kind of know. I think pretty much, the system that you have to connect to, even if your laptop is a PC, you're going to probably need to use Linux somehow. So you need to know that, and then your GitHub, all that kind of stuff. Just thinking about programming in general. And then the third thing would be big data technologies. So that would include SQL. That would include your Hadoop, for example, that ecosystem. Not every company is going to require you to have all of these different types of knowledge, but depending on which company you go to, having that exposure at minimum would help you to be a more attractive candidate. So like, for example, my first data science job was at AT&T, where literally everything was big data. There's literally nobody's handing me a CSV that has all the data and telling me, put this on your laptop. I have to leave the data where it is. Could be Hadoop, could be in, wherever. It could be in, like a database or wherever, but leave the data where it is and then fit a model to it, or, apply some summaries to it, visualize it. So how do you do that? How do you handle that kind of data? So that's really, really important. So if you get some kind of basic proficiency in all three of those areas, which is, how I handled it, then you could make the case to say, okay, I know what it is. I know what Spark is. I haven't used it, but, I know what it is. And you can see that I've learned a lot of other things that I needed to know. So I can make the case to say, hey, look, if you give me a chance, I can learn it if that's something that you guys need me to know. So that's kind of my take on it.
That's so important too. Like, if you think about it from an inclusion perspective, I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I speak about this because this is my identity, or these are my identities. But being a woman and being Black, like, those are two huge barriers. And sometimes people don't want to give you a chance. Like, you don't know what big data is until somebody gives you a chance to work with someone. So yeah, like, if you're in a position to influence or like help people along to learn these things or teach what you're learning, please do so, because we still need more inclusion among people who are using R and these other tools and working in these environments.
Absolutely. At every level, I definitely agree with that. So we're in the right place. We're all about inclusion here at Our Ladies Dallas. Any other comments or questions from the audience? Everybody's quiet now.
And if there's crickets, I want to know what you're watching on Netflix and what you're enjoying, or somewhere else.
Okay, so we got one question in the chat.
Okay.
We got a question in the chat. Actually, it's something I was kind of curious about because, I get approached by a lot of companies asking to, they're always trying to pull you away from whatever company you're currently at. Like, we need a data scientist, please leave your job. And actually, anyway, that happens a lot. So I actually did get some pretty aggressive, not aggressive, but some people from Netflix who were like, come on, come to Netflix. But what I had read online about the hiring process at Netflix was kind of intimidating. So that kind of turned me off. Not just the hiring process, I guess, but the work culture at Netflix, something about that, not to say it was bad, but it kind of, because it's so different, and it could be, different, challenging, I guess, to manage. It just kind of helped me to help to steer me away from it, but it didn't steer you away, when you had knowledge of it. So maybe if you could talk about maybe the hiring process and maybe just comment on, maybe your interpretation of, the culture. Like, what did you think about it before and how do you feel about it now?
That's a great one. And I was like you before. I used to get at least once a quarter messages from, the big tech companies, like, come work with us. Like, oh, I'm not moving out there. But I think like circumstance and everything lined up for this. But yeah, with Netflix, I can say we have a podcast, and there's like, I think some of the episodes are on YouTube, but it's called We Are Netflix. And they talk a lot about the hiring process and the culture. So I would definitely look at those if it's intimidating to you. My stance as I was going through the hiring process was, let's just see how this goes. Like, if I make it to the next step, I make it. I did a lot of research on the internet, just kind of like Googling. There's the site like Glassdoor. Sometimes it's not that reliable, but sometimes it can be. But you can get tips on like what interviews are like with different places. But really at Netflix, a big thing, like, I would say the two big ones for me in our culture are feedback. So we're all about like giving candid feedback, but with good intent, and then giving it often. And so what I compared it to was like some other places where I worked at before, where like you have your yearly performance review. So you may have done something wrong in December and you don't find out until the next July. And so, you're not given time to improve upon it. I'd rather you tell me kind of right then and there. That's how it was as a professor. Like, if something's wrong, let me know. If there's a problem, you need to raise it so I can help fix it. And so once I kind of thought of it from that perspective, I was like, oh, I do kind of practice this, or I lean into this aspect of the culture. And then the other one is freedom and responsibility. And these are things you can see on our website, on our jobs website. We're big on like, you make the decision that you think is best for Netflix, but also, what works for you. So in terms of software, like if you use R, we support that. If you use Python, we support that. Use whatever tool can get the job done, but make the right choice, like, don't use R if you've never used it before. You want to use what you know. So yeah, like once I started to think about all those values of the culture in a different way and how they applied to me, I was much less intimidated. And also just asking questions of the hiring manager and recruiters, because different people interpret it differently. But yeah, before super intimidated, didn't get it. Now I live that culture, and I wonder sometimes like how other companies are when they don't explicitly state like what their culture is.
Yeah, that's good. And I think to follow up on something you just said, or a follow-up question, something you just said. So if they tell you that you're free to use whichever language you want, how does that work in practice for collaboration? So I'm an R person, this other person's a Python person, but we need to do some stuff together. Does that create any sort of, challenge or conflict or anything like that? Or do you kind of have to work
That's
together
a
and say,
good
okay, we're going to
question.
work in R or we're going to work in Python together?
I haven't encountered that, because people lean into like that's what you use, like as long as it's clear. So if I'm doing something in R and I know that I'm going to talk to someone who mostly uses Python, I just make sure to comment well and like it's like any written document. You just want to make sure that it's clear. Um, so yeah, I haven't really encountered that. But you do kind of find your tribe too. So there's a contingent of people who use R, so you can go to them with questions. There's a contingent of people who are like the experts in Tableau, so you can go to them with questions. So it hasn't been a huge barrier. And then like another element of our culture is people over process. So like we don't want to prescribe like you have to do this in Python, you have to do this in SQL. So people know that. So we don't, argue or have conflicts about that.
Okay, great. And we have another question from Shanita. Do you work from home? And if so, is it temporary or permanent?
Yeah, I'm at home in my hot office with no ventilation. um, it's so different companies have had different COVID policies, which I found really interesting. So for us, we will be returning to work soon, but in a very flexible way. So I will still work from home quite a bit, and have the option of coming in. There probably will be some people who don't come back into the office. But I think Netflix has been very flexible and like make the right choice for you and also for like your stakeholders in your role. um, so yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what the cadence will be of like when I go in versus when I'm home, but I like that I have the flexibility to decide. And if things get worse with the pandemic again, um, then I have no problem saying that I'm not going into anybody's office. So
Cool. Okay, we got one more question just popped in. What resources would you suggest to students who are just starting out with R and need to practice on their own? I'm a social science graduate student at the University of Sao Paulo, and a lot of students know they need to use R but don't know how to get started. I taught myself online, but it was hard. Also, your class sounds amazing.
I mean, I was gonna plug my class. Honestly, sometimes I feel conflicted about it because like Davidson charges tuition and this course was like part of the college, but it's also an open source website and that is a resource that anyone can use. So if you find like my course website helpful to go through all those steps, feel free to do so. Trying to think of like things that I did, just lots of Googling. Just, I feel like one of the biggest data science skills one can learn is just how to search for things better, more efficiently. Knowing which resources are more reliable than others, like Stack Overflow is super helpful for R. um, More and more lately, the R website has been very helpful for directly answering questions related to things like installing and all that kind of stuff. But I will also encourage try not to work on your own. Like if you're in this R Ladies meetup, then there's a community of people. So find somebody who might work alongside you, or like find a stakeholder, like someone who's not a data person, but they have a question that you can help answer. Just find someone else, to kind of keep you going because it can be discouraging, like all the Googling and like not getting things right, not even installing it correctly. So yeah, tell that person or those students to work together and they can use my site and just Google Stack Overflow. Um, yeah.
Yep, and I'll plug again, I guess, for RStudio Cloud, like we referenced earlier, in case you
Yeah.
just kind of need that environment to give you a space, some space to do the practice. Also, there's and I could put a link in the chat too. One of our Ladies Dallas members, he works at RStudio. His name is Thomas Mock, and he hosts the Tidy Tuesday series. So where
Oh,
he actually would post some kind of challenge, I guess, where he's just kind of talking about how he's using some of the R packages in order to solve certain kinds of problems, or do certain data visualizations, or explore data in different ways. So yeah, definitely, I can find a link to that and put that in the chat in case you just kind of want to practice. Because I think a lot of these, one path to learning is to just say, okay, let me learn this one package, by itself, and then this other package by itself, right? But usually what happens is when you're trying to solve a problem, or you're trying to actually do something, you need a lot of different resources. And part of the challenge is kind of knowing how to put all these different tools together, how to select the right tools, and then how to actually use them together, right? So I need the output from this tool to put into the function in this tool, and it's just like all these different things. I need to, wrangle my data together using dplyr, and then I need to put it into the ggplot function, and like there's so many different kinds of things that happen. So so that's definitely one thing to do, is just, practice, find different kinds of projects, just like Dr. Smith mentioned, that if you find a data set that is just kind of interesting, and you have some questions that you think you can answer with it, and maybe there's some kind of methodology or tools that you would like to try out in order to answer that question, then that would be a really good opportunity for you to do that. Okay.
I just put a link in too for the R for Data Science book because it's free online, and that's the text that my students use and that I use still to learn things. So that's a
Great.
good free resource.
Yeah, quite a few free books online. Yeah, that's a really good one, R for Data Science. And by the way, if you scroll up, I had posted a link to Dr. Smith's. I found the links to the edX course that you mentioned, and also I have your course website. I typed it in.
Thank you.
And go ahead and just click on it. But yeah, that's what we got here. Any other questions? Really, really great discussion. This is so exciting.
Quickly in the chat, type what you're watching on Netflix because I'm just curious. I won't use it for work. I just like asking people what they're watching.
I'm gonna answer mine verbally. So I've been watching this series called Heist, which is, I don't know why it's like it's a true crime kind of thing where they actually act out, like they have the real person who actually did the crime, and some of the people who helped them, or related to them, whatever, tell the story of what they did, and but they actually acted out. They have actors or whatever acting. It's really, really cool, and like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen next? So it's super high energy. In chat, I'm seeing Lucifer, Queen of the South. And then somebody says they've never watched, oh, Never Have I Ever?
That's a show, yeah, Never Have I Ever.
That's a show, oh, okay. I thought you were saying you never watched Netflix. Okay, I've never heard of that one. Okay, cool. What are you watching?
A lot of things. I was working closely with the film team for a while, so I was watching basically all the movies. So I still watch all of our movies that were nominated for awards, like The Five Bloods. I've seen like 3-4 times.
Oh, really?
Okay. The Prom. And then, I mean, I enjoy stuff on other platforms too. So I've been watching a show on HBO called The White Lotus. It's a new show. Really interesting. And what else on Netflix? A lot of the reality. Like I got really into Love Is Blind last year, and now they have like the After the Altar, where they're like following the couple that got married. So I love that kind of stuff. And then our documentaries too, I like a lot.
Great. Okay. Yep. And I see a couple other responses to place. Naomi Osaka, Japan Sinks pose. Yeah. So lots of
Alice in Borderland was a good one. I'll put that one in the chat.
Yep. Thank you for joining us, James.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. Yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm going to respond to all the LinkedIn's in a second.
Yeah. Oh, it's Sophia. So I've been watching Manifest as well. I started watching it on Netflix. They only had 2 seasons there, but then I had to switch over to Hulu because they have season 3. So if you have Hulu, pop over there and watch the rest
Do
of
what
it.
you gotta do. Yeah, that
I didn't even know they
there's been
had
a
more
lot
than,
of talk about that.
I didn't even know they
I've
had
been
anything
watching it
beyond
too.
season 3. So that's good. I guess I need to figure out how to find season 4 and 5. But yeah, I didn't even know they went beyond season 3. I just finished it. So but anyway, yeah, okay. So this is great. Yeah, we're definitely gonna have you back for real. So I would like to thank you for joining us and for yeah, just walking us through this really exciting journey through your career, through your experience with working with the tidyverse in your professional life and teaching life, and just for being a great conversationalist. This is a really great discussion, and thank you all for joining us. Again, we are looking for speakers, so if you want to give a talk, again, if it's just like 15 minutes or 5 minutes even, hey, I just want to talk about what I've worked on, please let me know so that we can have you speak to our audience. And with that, I will end it here. Oh, your LinkedIn. Okay, yep, somebody was looking for that. And that's also posted on the Meetup site. Great. Okay, so yeah, later, maybe give me a day. I'll go ahead and upload the video, and yeah, well, you can watch the recording again. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.